Hello and welcome to Occult Explorers. I'm your host Snappy, and I'm joined today with our co-host Dion the Barber. And yeah, welcome to the debut episode. Right, so this is our new series where the whole point of this series is going to be doing kind of explorative deep dives into occult subjects. So we're not so much trying to give you a definitive proof. We're not here to give you all of the direct sources. We're here to have a conversation and to tell stories based in history, based in real beliefs and what people really ascribe to, but more about just the nature of story and what's going on in these different cultures. You want to add anything, Dion?
Oh, just say hello and glad to be here, and uh, put on your seatbelts and get ready to have fun because that's what part of this is about is fun is these stories from the past, entertaining stories, and, the name Explorers, we're free to explore all sources and all stories. That's part of it. We're not just stuck in one little category because it's all interesting. This is all intriguing and interesting and fun. Have some fun with it. With that, I'd like to say a little disclaimer. We might be talking about some uncomfortable subjects, and we value your mental health as you should, like rape, sacrifice. And this is an ancient time. And so if those subjects make you feel uncomfortable, maybe sit this one out, but, and check in the future. But yeah, we hope you have some fun today.
Yeah, exactly. We just want to make sure that everyone understands like with this show, we are going to be going to those dark, uncomfortable places, right? So we're going to be exploring things from various angles, right? And it's all about that exploration. So take everything we're saying here with a grain of salt. We're just trying to paint a picture. So, with that being said, the main focus of this episode and of our next three episodes is going to be exploring what's called the mysteries of Tyre, right? And the concept of the sacred grove. So to begin with, we're gonna deep dive into this idea of the sacred grove. So Dion, what's a sacred grove?
Yeah, what's a sacred grove? Well, I got my golf hat on today, you notice? Because it's golf course. In modern times, it's it's walled off, and inside it's perfectly manicured. The garden is beautiful, tended, and that's where rich people come together and they do business. And they have sacred sport, and then they retire off to the country club afterwards and smoke some cigars and tell stories. That's a modern sacred grove, or it's a park. But in ancient times, these sacred groves had power. They had mystery, and that's where a lot of things were taking place in these myths that we read. They were taking place in these forests, these ancient groves that has a separate set of rules.
Right. No, yeah. And like what I keep coming across when I was doing my deep dive into this idea of the sacred grove, what I kept coming across was this idea of setting a place aside that is a protected area, right? Like you were saying, like some place where people can hold this kind of area where it's like what I kept seeing with a lot of the anthropologists and the philosophers, they talk about this idea as humanity develops and we start to industrialize and we start to destroy nature, right? We needed to separate a place of nature off to maintain that pristine natural element and all of that kind of raw beauty and eroticism and violence that represents. So it's not just simply that these places are places where people go and relax. They're also meant to be places of that unprotected, unbridled natural world where we have no protection.
Yeah, that's the wild forest. That's what it's like. It's a thriving wild forest. Um, the sacred. We got one article. R. Barnett. I don't know if you read that one. That's a sacred groves and sacrifice in ancient Greece, and he talks about how it's a disturbance in linear time. It's this non-linear disturbance inside the forest that creates renewal. It's the loss of innocence that creates the renewal. Like in permaculture, forests create energy. It's all one big system tied together. The leaves fall and that creates mulch. There's decay and rebirth. And there's also a balance between the animals and the life in the forest, and I'm vegetarian, but I could see the sacrifice element in the predator animal element of the forest, the hunt. It's the sacred hunt. And it's what the animal does in the forest. It's the loss of innocence.
Right.
And what these authors are putting forth is that the forest likes that. It feeds off that. It's part of its biodynamic system is the transfer of energy.
Right. And this transfer of energy, I think, is key here. So one of the, like in that essay you're talking about, one of the key philosophers that's brought forth in this is George Bataille. And George Bataille, he's a radical materialist on one side, but also a mystic. And what he talks about, which is really interesting, is this idea of the accursed share. So what he talks about is as society again develops and we start producing material culture, we have this grand excess, okay? We have all this excess energy that has to be spent, whether that's leisure time, whether that's, non-procreative sex, whether it's the consumption of food. We have all of this additional energy and we need to do something with it or else it rots, it decays, it causes destruction. So society has to develop projects in which we can expand this energy. So what we see with the Sacred Grove is a way to tie all of this in, to expand the energy in a communal way, and it's also about this nostalgic factor. What Bataille talks about a lot is how people have this reminiscent idea of oneness, of this time before birth and this time after death, where we have this reflection of a time when everything was connected. But in our current state, with all of our stuff and our individuality, we cannot get there. And there's this terror, inherent terror in trying to perceive the one. And when you try to perceive it, that you lose the sense of identity. So what sacrifice does is it's a stand-in. By destroying something, it becomes a sacred object. And you're able to witness and participate in this experience of the one via proxy. So you die a little death, right? Like this idea of orgasm and this whole thing about, again, expending. And this is where the sacred and the erotic merge for the same purpose of this divine ecstasy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, and see, in that article, I didn't know about Bataille. I just put the quote, took from the article thinking, hey, that's a neat quote. But I didn't know how deep the brother went into the concept of the gift as the sacrifice.
Right.
They're equal. I'd like to read something about temenos and what temenos is in the Greek word. I'm butchering it, obviously, because if we have any of our Greek friends listening that study the Greek language. And it's a piece of land that's cut off and assigned as an official domain, especially the kings and chiefs, or a piece of land marked off for common uses, dedicated to a god, such as a sanctuary, holy grove, or holy precinct. And we're going to be using the word precinct later, the sacred precinct. But, another concept of these temenos, or the sacred grove in ancient Greece, was the concept of asylum. And that's where everything in the grove was dedicated to a particular god. And if you were a criminal, a robber, or for whatever reason, if you could make it to the grove, you had protection, the concept of asylum within these trees, the sacred trees that are marked off. And I want you to think about that later on in the story, or in our next episode when we get to some of these other groves we'll be exploring. The concept of asylum in the grove. And also, do you know about Hercules in the grove?
Yeah, so I just want to highlight that and talk a bit about Hercules and some of these sacred groves, because it just triggered something I was reading the other day about Hercules and one of the characters that he has to fight. So he has to fight several of these people who are connected to Ares, who are it's like this ongoing rivalry between Zeus and Ares that's fought between Hercules and his various heroes that come up, or villains, for a better term. But one of them is this guy, Cycnos, or I'm probably saying that brutalizing.
I was going to say Kikanos.
Kikanos, right?
So who knows? We don't know.
The thing with him, though, is he is a criminal who goes to the sacred grove and he inverts it and he exploits that area. So in the story, he can't be removed, even though he's committing all this violence, because he's in a protected space. So
he took over the grove.
Took it over, and he starts taking people's heads and turning them into prophetic tokens, so then Hercules has to come and restore the grove, right? Only a divine figure can enter the grove and commit violence, and then therefore transforming the grove into the gymnasium. And they engage in single combat, where now Kyknos becomes the sacrifice, and it restores and gives rebirth to the grove, and it becomes healed again, and can now act as this place of freedom, where people are protected, and you can't go and accuse people of crimes there.
Right. Have you heard of Diana Nemorensis?
No. What's this?
And so Diana Nemorensis is another myth, and there's a grove that she's in a grove, and her sacred consort, or her partner, is called Rex Nemorensis, the king, and he's chosen from a runaway slave that makes it into the grove. And the way you become the new king, the new Rex Nemorensis of Diana, is you have to kill the other king. So it's like a slave will run into the grove, and if he could take out the king, he's the new king of the grove for Diana for a year. And and with that story is also the Lake of Diana, or what's called the Mirror of Diana, is attached to that story. We'll talk about that later on in another episode. But yeah, these groves are connected to rape and sacrifice. A lot of these stories are taking place in these groves, and we don't really look at it. We're looking at the story, at the act itself, but not the environment, the setting. And the setting's important because sometimes the trees require it. Sometimes the trees, and another thing we didn't discuss is that these groves are a lot of times built on burial grounds and cemeteries, and there's a connection to the ancestor. And so as you're worshiping the trees, you're worshiping your ancestors, and the blood that's being spilled is for your ancestors as well. It's like this life and death, renewal, rebirth in the grove.
Right. I think it's also it's important to kind of take us back to this kind of mindset. So I've been reading a lot of this guy, Ludwig Klages, and he talks about the Pelasgian worldview. And he says the key to this Pelasgian worldview is this reality of images, and this understanding that when people die and they're going to the underworld, that they're in this state of freedom, and that they become like the gods. And so there was almost within the Pelasgian culture an overemphasis placed upon the dead and upon the sacrifice, where the dead were elevated higher than the living. And they would even bury them within the home in center places like the stove, or within their own gardens, their own sacred spaces that they would have. And what I think is, it's important to understand that the dead are not gone, that these figures are alive, and that they can make demands of you. And that in order for the cycle of life to continue, there's this understanding that there has to be this transition. You have to participate within the sacrifice. You have to feed the ancestors, and then they in turn feed and help you. It's a cyclical as well as a cooperative relationship,
Oh yeah. Maybe we could show some pictures.
Yeah, let's get into it. So we'll start here.
Maybe we got Olympia. Yeah. This is one of the first, one of the first spots right here, one of the first groves. I think that in history, planted by Heracles, huh? It's said to plant this grove, and it's tied to sports as well. Eventually, sports come out of the grove. It's based on the sacred hunt, in the sacrifice and renewal of birth and death. That gets turned into sports.
Right. It's important we talk about that, because when we look at the story of was it you were telling me about this? I think it was Artemis, and then she gets taken by Zeus, and that happens within the sacred grove, right? So, there's that is the place where this kind of defiling of the virgin happens, where, that extremity where creation and death can take place,
Though I know with Artemis, she, her grove is pretty powerful, and history, you'll see that, she's kind of separate to the gods a little bit in her power there with the grove, and she'll kill people for just looking on the nymphs. If you're looking on anybody bathing, you might get killed for that, just
Right.
for taking a peek.
Well,
you
that's
know.
also a theme that we see throughout, right? Like, I just keep thinking about like when I was reading the Bacchae, right? And it's you get these dual reasons for why Pentheus is destroyed, right? On the surface level, it's because he spurns Dionysus, and Dionysus comes down and he's now, I'm going to destroy him, right? You spurned me, you refuse to acknowledge, you resist, you're going to die. But then there's also the literal death. He is killed because he observes the rites, and then the women rip him to shreds for it. And
Yeah.
the reason why he goes to observe the rites is because he is intrigued. He can't, he's drawn to that erotic, that profane and sacred place, that he desires it. He cannot avoid looking. So it's that paradox, right? To look is to be destroyed, but also you have to look.
Yeah. Well, since we kind of went into a little bit of what the sacred grove is and the concept of sacrifice in the grove and the sacred domain of asylum, let's jump to Ethiopia.
All right.
Well, that picture right there, if you go back to that picture, that's the in Greece, these are sacred forests of Zagori, and they're protected in Greece. And there's an area there where there's a whole land of a stretch of land that's been, it's like here we'd call it conservation. But what they're doing is conservation to the gods. It's sacred because it's attached to a god, not just because we got to take care of nature. But yeah, let's go to Ethiopia.
All right. So we just have Artemis there.
We have so many pictures and slides, folks. And see, we're compressing thousands of years of history into a little YouTube channel. So it's like, bear with us. Now, if you notice right here in this picture, this is Ethiopia. This is a sacred church forest. And the desert's encroaching on it. And through deforestation and cutting down the trees, they're endangered, these trees in Ethiopia. And the only reason it's protected is because it's a church forest. You could see that, or how the deserts all around it would just take it out.
Wow. So wild.
And they've consecrated, this forest is consecrated to Jesus Christos in the Ethiopian tradition. Yeah. And so this is a forest for Christ. And so it's protected. You don't cut it down. And I saw some sacred forests in Africa when I was in Benin, Africa. And, we're driving with the shaman, and he says, that's the sacred forest over there. He points, and I look to the left and to the right. It's the same forest to me. It don't look no difference. He goes, nah, you don't go in that part. We don't hunt there. They know, like, are you familiar with the Sherwood Forest? Do you ever remember those mythologies, the Sherwood Forest?
Oh, of course. Robin Hood and his merry men.
Yeah. And what did he do? He went into that forest to get asylum.
Right.
And, in the forest had a little power, had a little juice onto its own,
So for sure. Like, just understanding too, like you could go to these sacred groves, like the peasants could go there and could collect fruit and could actually, and they wouldn't be stopped by nobles, right? So it was like a free place, right? Freedom was essential.
But what's ironic is that the nobles do have their own sacred forests, and these are called royal hunting grounds. And you'll see those around castles and royalty. And they'll mark off the section of land for their hunting ground because they understand the royal hunt. That's why, and then you go back to their castles and they got all the horns on the walls. And for years I couldn't connect with it as a vegetarian. My dad owned a slaughterhouse. So I was like, these creepos. But now I'm understanding what they're doing. It's part of a process. They're, the hunt. It's, and considering that they study the classics. So they know what they're doing when they're out there doing that.
Right. So let's continue here on with our Ethiopia.
Ooh,
yeah. So
this is Hiram Abiff. Now, folks, we're going to let you know we're going into Masonic stories and legends. This is Freemasonry, right? Like I said, we're going to explore everything. Nothing's off limits for us. And Hiram Abiff, the story with him is you got King Solomon wanted to build a temple, and he went to get King Hiram of Tyre. And King Hiram of Tyre recommended Hiram Abiff, who was his master builder and wizard. And he comes down there and he helps him build a temple. And supposedly the temples are copies of the Melkart Phoenician temples, because that's what he knew how to build. And so this is Freemason myth, folks. And so in this myth, Queen Sheba is enamored with Hiram Abiff, the widow's son, who they consider Jesus Christ in Masonry. And King Solomon don't like that. And King Solomon has 3 guys go to Hiram Abiff to give up the secrets of the temple, and they kill him because he won't give it up. And he's resurrected. And in Masonic myths, that's a form of their Christ, the Hiram Abiff from Tyre, who's the wizard of the temples. And, there's stories of snakes involved, him using snakes to help build the buildings. And, it's just a whole nother mythology that points to Tyre,
Yeah. So what's the significance of Tyre and of like the Phoenicians? Like, can you give a rundown of this?
Yeah. Well, here we got a little Phoenician map. And if you'll notice on the right-hand side, that's where Tyre is, where the purple is. And it's ironic that they put the Phoenicians in purple because of the purple people. That's what the name is. Some people will say it's phonetics, an alphabet, but in older translations, the etymology is purple. The purple people. And so on the right-hand side, you'll notice that if the Silk Roads would terminate at Tyre, so the Central Asian Silk Roads, all the trading stuff, above goes to Turkey, below goes to Egypt. So they were a trading power. That was their power. And what did they have to trade? They had cedar forests. That was their big contribution, was the cedar forest in Lebanon. And the purple snails, which are the murex mollusks. And these shells can produce purple dye as well as red. They're getting red dyes out of them. And it has psychoactive properties. And so those 2 products alone help them to get into the trade game. And they built these boats that would hug the coast. Every 30 miles, they would set up an installation. And they managed to become the kings of trade. Imagine them like your pharmacy of ancient times. They had everything, was all put together and compounded. And they were syncretic too in their religion. Their gods were syncretic of Greece, Egypt, Sumerian, Persian stuff. And you put it all together. Maybe you could show one of the pictures of the temple there, since we were talking about how Hiram Abiff built the temple for King Solomon. Go again. Yeah, right there. See right there, and go again to the next picture, and you'll see it right there. It's a water temple. And they had a temple that was filled with water. And it reminds me of the Osirion in Egypt at the 17th Nome. And that's where you get that flower of life symbol that's laser etched into it, the only place on earth. And the temple was built to use water. And I see this as a giant mikveh, to do baptism. It's dedicated to El. The god El is a water god. Though you have connotations with the desert as well. And see, the Phoenicians, a lot of people, historians will say they're Canaanite. These are the seafaring Canaanites, as opposed to their cousins, which are, in the Bible, Israel and Judah, southern and northern kingdom, Canaanite. And these are the ones at the sea. And their whole power was based around the sea. Like, their cities were only on the coast. They were a trade power, like I said. Maybe go forward in a couple pictures. And so that's Melkart. And so go back one more. So this is Melkart, their god. And the name means Lord of the City, King of Kings. You'll notice he has little knots around his neck there. And you'll see
also,
that
it's not clear in this picture, but that is like the headdress he's wearing is a lion's mouth.
Yeah. And it's Herculean in the myths. And so even in mythology, they'll call him Melkart Heracles in certain forms of him. In other forms, he's more Egyptian, connected to Osiris, and he'll be holding an ankh or a blue lily and doing like the Egyptian stance, in other versions of him, he's holding a bow, like Heracles. He's the god of rebirth, healing, vegetation, fertility. and his partner is Astarte. Yeah, and she goes by different names: Asherah, Astarte, Tanit. There's
Inanna.
so many names, but yeah, go back to her right there and see. And that right there, see her hand is up. That's part of their symbology. You might see that symbol, like the eye, the repelling the evil eye, or the hand. That's part of a Tyrian mythology, is having that hand, which you'll see in different talismanic stuff.
Right.
And so,
You always see that
you
with
know,
that hand of Hamsa, which is a very ancient symbol,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is part of the roots of it is Astarte. And she has the STR root in her name. For people, for the etymologists out there, they know what that connects to. And she's also connected to Aphrodite. Inanna, Ishtar. So they talk about in history the festival that they had once a year there at Tyre in Carthage, and it's at the sacred precinct, the holy precinct of Melkart. We talked about that word precinct, which is the Temenos, or the Holy Grove. And so now I want to share the mythology of the founding of Tyre and the god. And so what happened was, right there's Tyre. And you see Tyre is off the coast of it's 20 feet deep of water. And it was later on destroyed by Alexander when he destroyed and conquered Alexander the Great. And he told him, hey, if you let me come sacrifice to Melkart, I won't destroy your city. And the priest told him to buzz off and killed the emissary. So eventually he built like a long road, out to the island with using their ruins and their temples on the land. And so that's how it was destroyed. And at that time, all the priests and the women got in boats and went to Carthage. But I'll tell you how it was founded. It's founded on a myth called the Ambrosial Rocks, which were these two floating rocks in the water. And on one of the rocks had an olive tree that was on fire with a snake wrapped around it. And on top was an eagle with a cup. And he tells them how to harness it is that if you bring the rocks together, you kill the snake and do certain things. And they founded the city. And there's also Tyros. And she wants a purple robe. And so he figures out, well, hey, if I can go get these purple shells, I can get the purple color out of it. And it's all tied up in the myth and the founding of Tyre. And so we can take those elements of the mythology and we'll unpack it in the ritual that they have once a year, which is the egresis. And it's the rebirth of the god, the resurrection of the god, the opening the eyes of the god. And that's what, and it's at Melkart's precinct. They'd have it once a year where it's recorded the first time that King Hiram had to do it with the priestess of Astarte. And in that ritual, if we were going to do that ritual, we would start right now at 10:30 Saturday. What's the date today, Snappy?
Today we're the 3rd, I think. No, or the 18th. Sorry, 18th of March, 18th.
Right? Yeah, that's right. And so,
sorry, 3rd month.
We do a 3-day incubation of the king, and we'd resurrect him 3 days from now on the 21st on the vernal equinox of Melkart.
Oh, wow.
And so, what will we do today? How would we start the ritual? And we're interested in the rebirth, but before he can be reborn, we got to do the death ritual. We're going to focus on that first, and we're going to unpack it using the Greco-Egyptian, because that was the mythologies of Melkart. It was syncretic,
right?
And what they would do first,
because within the myths, like, it's not explicit, but we were talking about this earlier, right? There are two forms of Heracles, right? There's Heracles the young and Heracles the old, and it is understood that these are different characters, right? That a transformation has taken place.
And with Melkart too, it's the beard. See how right here he has a beard, and that's the resurrection. Later he gets the beard, and they have that with Melkart and Heracles, and you'll see it on coins and different things, and so this ritual that they would do on the 21st or 22nd in our calendar of March, the equinox, at the sacred precinct, and this was a rebirthing ritual, a fertility ritual. And so if we started 3 days ahead, we would take the king and we would shave him of all of his hair. Everything. Hairless. We're going to shave him of his hair. And then he's going to be given a compound of herbs. Now, I might have told you the story before, Viboga in Cameroon. The Cameroons, they do the Iobang. And what they do is they dig a hole in the ground and they give you a compound of herbs and they cover you in palm fronds. And then you have a death experience over the course of a couple of days and you're reborn. So imagine they're going to do this to the king. He has to die. And he has to contact the ancestors and go into the netherworlds. And so, like I said, they're going to shave him down and they're going to nick him while they're shaving him in certain spots, which is going to act as a way to introduce the medicated wraps or bandages, like a mummy, al-azores, the mummy in Arabic. You know how they wrap the mummies? And by wrapping them as a mummy, they were introducing the compound drugs to the medicated wraps. And this is what they did. They would do this in Egypt. And he would go through this state of death until he's going to be reborn. Now, we're going to talk about the rebirth through Astarte. Now, in this area, the sacred precinct by the olive tree, we might fumigate the area with psychoactive herbs, the cannabism, some people might call it the cannabis, or even a lot of other herbs you can put in there. And in the smell is going to get to you, the sound, the drums, the music.
Yeah, your frankincense would get you DMT.
Yeah, myrrh is part of it. Olive oil isn't, and so we'll unpack it using some of the elements of the myth, the olive oil, because we know that they were using olive as an anointing oil. As part of the Canaanite tradition, everything got olive oil on it. And so so at this point, maybe if there's any kids in the room, you're going to cover their ears, or if there's any academics, we're going to fry your brains. We're just going to tell you about these ancient rituals, what they might have done. So Melkart is laying there dead, and they got to wake him up. So the priestess might take a medicated dildo. And if he ain't awake then, she's going to slap him around like a dominatrix. You got to violently wake him up so he can open his mouth, so he can drink golden purple medicated urine. You hear that? It was a tradition. And if he wakes up and gets up, you know who he is? He's the alpha big boss king supreme, the lord of the city. And this is a healing, a regenerative fertility rituals using psychoactive compounds and sexual rites. And it's in their mythologies. The compounds are in the myth. And these Phoenicians were wiped out later, but the myths survive.
Right. We see allusions to this kind of stuff all over the place. Like just you talking, I immediately think of Odysseus and his necromantic rites, digging a ditch, making offerings of the sweet wine and the barley, and then being transported into the underworld where he has to make offerings of a sacrifice, and then the spirits of the dead drink the blood, right? Like, so they're like, that's not the same, but it's a similar process that's happening. There's a clear physics at play that these people have, that's functioning. And if you read the myths with that careful eye, if you understand, the Orphic Vox, you can see the symbolism at work. And like you were saying, this survives across cultures. It's not just the Phoenicians. They kind of transplant it everywhere they go. And they go everywhere, or everyone buys their stuff.
and we didn't even bring up yet Melkart's other name, which is Baal Haman. Child sacrifice. They were doing that.
Central guard of this. We did mention Carthage, but Baal Haman is the central god of Carthaginians.
Yeah,
right?
And they were doing child sacrifice, and some people they're saying they're just passing the baby over the fire. And we know that passing the baby over the fire is mixed in a lot of myths, but they found the graves, and there are apologists who try to say no, or this is anti-Semitic, or we're just exploring what was happening in ancient history. We don't think anybody was bad or good, particularly of any culture. Everybody was doing good and bad. We're neutral for everybody, folks. And so, but the Baal Haman stuff does connect to down there to Israel, and because this is not too far away. Like the Sea of Galilee is 35 miles from Tyre. This stuff that we're talking about, this is 35 miles from a lot of the mysteries in the Bible taking place. So it's connected. So at this time, you know what? Let's jump. Let's talk about how they spread this. Let's go to Italy.
Okay. Yeah. Let's bring this back up. I also just want to highlight too, before we jump to Italy, it's just, you see this kind of sacrifice everywhere. Okay. Every culture, you know, like we all have excess that we have to destroy in different cultures. What defines a culture, according to like Bataille and his theory of religion, is how they dispose, right? Which, how they dispose of this excess wealth, you know, how they transform this energy and how they bring community together, you know. So the destruction of children, it is shocking to us, but this is something that was quite normal at a certain point in history. And then even though it's no longer children, you see the reflection of this and it transfers across society. Like Bataille would claim, like in our modern age, instead of sacrificing children like we would have done in a sacred grove once a year, once or two, we now sacrifice millions of young men and women on the battlefield of war, you know, or in the factories. It's the same kind of expenditure, the same kind of waste, right? So this is really scary stuff, but this is human stuff, right?
Oh yeah. Well, so you know where we're at right now? To go back to that picture, back to that island.
Okay.
Right there. That's the Phoenician island city of Motia off the coast of Sicily. And you'll notice there's a circle around it. That's the Temenos. There was a grove there. And you have what's called the Pool of Baal. And it was a water pool. And this is special because this pool, it was a reflecting pool of the stars above. And they would chart the stars in the pool.
Wow.
And and so this is, like I said, they would set these outposts around the Mediterranean, Baal Amen, and it has the purple dyes, it has the snakes, it has olive trees. There's certain elements you'll find in each of these little installations they do. Go to the next picture, which people might find interesting. And this is the Grove of Bomarzo, and it's interesting. You could go to the next picture. The next two pictures, you see that one, and then even the next one. It was a grove that was built in the 16th century that was commissioned by Orsini. I don't know if you know the Orsini family, and he was married to Farnese, of the Farnese lady. And if you know the Farnese Pentagon in Italy of King Juan Carlos, it's the real Pentagon, an ancient one, but they commissioned this garden with all these weird statues, and I got a book a while back right here. And it's about this garden, and this is years ago. I got it at the thrift store. And it talks about this crazy garden with all these sculptures. And what happened was it fell into disrepair for hundreds of years until Salvador Dali, did a painting about it. And it became popularized and they refurbished the spot. And it's now considered the sacred grove of Bomarzo. And you can see that's supposed to be Hercules right there fighting. Oh my God, I can't think of the name. The name is slipping me, but he battles. He's wrestling. I don't know if it's his lover, becomes his lover, or they're friends and lovers. I guess that's how it works, enemies and lovers. But that's part of the mythology too. It's built in this garden there, Bomarzo, Italy. Let's just jump to Spain. Right here, Taunt. Yeah. And so next we're going to talk about, in Spain, we're talking about these olive groves in Melcart, how it's sacred to them. The oldest olive tree in the world is in Spain. It's 1,700 years old, and they also got the biggest ancient grove of olive trees. And in this general vicinity, you got a lot of these statues. Like, go to the next couple statues. That's the Lady of Guatemala, and go to the next one, the Lady of Elche, and these are by Cadiz, which is ancient. So we'll talk about Cadiz. All right, that's where the 11th labor of Hercules is supposed to have taken place with the king of Cadiz. This is where they found these sculptures, the Lady of Elche, in that vicinity with those weird earring things. And this is where recently, 11 months ago, they found the Temple of Heracles.
Yeah, Melkart Heracles, right?
Yep.
And this was a mythological temple that was hypothesized for people have been searching for years and years, and they finally found it near Cadiz.
Yeah. And it has a foundation for the pillars, and the two pillars are like Wacom boas. There's a lot. These two pillars, and I didn't even tell you earlier when I was talking about the olive tree of Melkart and that ritual. I forgot to tell you there was two poles, the Asherah poles of Hercules.
Wow.
There's so much. Like we got thousands of years to unpacking this. We're trying to go fast just to get around the Mediterranean before we even get to the other parts of the story. And these are Iberian Phoenician sculptures, and inside that head is an urn. In these statues, there's a hole you can put the ashes of your ancestors in there.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so they found, and this would be in a sacred grove with your ancestors, and it's part of a whole process. I said the 11th labor of Hercules. You got the 12th labor, which is what is that? The Garden of Hesperides.
Yeah, where he gets the apples, right?
Yeah, and I think it's Pliny who says when he goes there later on, and this is supposed to be in Morocco or Algeria at Lixus. And he says when he gets there later on, all that's left is an olive grove.
Oh, wow.
That's what's left of the Garden of Hesperides. And it has a snake around the tree. And I would bet that our Greek student friends probably could unpack the name a little better and say it's not an apple. I'm sure it probably translates to something else. I won't attempt it, but I'll let them attempt that. I'm sure there's other meanings in that. And if you go down the coast from there, you get Carthage. Oh, and in between there's Saint. Saint August is Saint Augustine.
Of course, right?
Yeah, he's right there. Well, he in Tunis, or Algeria, Tunis area, they have he had a sacred olive tree. They say he planted this olive tree, and now Muslims do rituals at that olive tree. And this is what they do at the olive tree of Saint Augustine in North Africa. They take the foreskins of their baby and they plant it at the root of the tree. And then what's going to happen is the olive tree is going to bless their children with long life by feeding it foreskins.
Whoa.
Yeah, no. And that's the planted by Saint Augustine. And these are Muslims who know it's a Augustine tree. And then if you go down a little farther, why don't you show a picture of Carthage?
Yeah, let's do that. But yeah, it's just showing, right? These things are universal, right? This idea of sacrifice, it doesn't matter your culture.
Yeah. There's Carthage right there, a representation of what it was. It has a light tower. That's it really right there. They found graves with child sacrifice. And, some people are saying now, like, oh, no, those weren't sacrifices. Those are just abortions or some shit, But, hey, hundreds of babies they found in little urns, dead babies, And this is when they conquered Tyre, when Alexander took out Tyre, this is where they all went. The royalty went to Carthage. Melkart, it's all connected.
Wow.
And eventually this gets taken out in the Punic Wars by Rome. Completely wipes them out. And it's at that point that's like
the earth, right?
Yeah. And then and all the other spots where they're at, they get taken over, And so that's why the history of the purple people eaters is we don't know a lot. We have to go through a lot of other histories to get these stories about them,
No, but it's clear what we can see, though, that there are these places where after even, Tyre is long destroyed, the Carthaginians are long destroyed, we see the purple still surviving. We see the mysteries still surviving in the places where they set up shop. Like we will be talking about in later episodes, how we see similar Herculean, Melkartian rites being practiced around Israel, and around Tyre after Tyre's gone. We see it in Italy, and specifically we see it in Marseille, and we see it in Cadiz, right? Like there are these bastions where it maintains itself,
Snappy, could you go back to the original Phoenician map?
Yeah. right. Where are we? There we are.
Perfect. So we made the tour. We started off on the right-hand side, and we went around to the islands, went to Spain, Italy, Morocco, down to Tunis, Algeria, Carthage. Next, let's go to Egypt. And you see where Egypt is right there at the bottom right. And the three ancient groves, olive groves in Egypt. Remember, I'm following olive groves. That's what I'm doing. The oldest olive groves in Egypt are at three places, and that's Alexandria. If you go, there's a picture of Siwa right there. All right, we have the Oracle of Amen at the Oasis of Siwa, and that's where one of the oldest olive groves is in Egypt. The three oldest olive groves in Egypt is at Siwa, the Oracle of Amen, on the road Giza, where the pyramids are, to Cairo, and Alexandria.
Now, you were blowing my mind the other night when we were researching for this about Ammon in its dual nature with the Greeks and becoming this kind of like, cross-cultural deity. Can you talk about what his role is and how he kind of functions all around the Mediterranean?
Well, we'll unpack that in episode 2. We'll get a little more into that. But there is Zeus Amen, Baal Amen, Amen. There's different takes on it, but they incorporate. You have Baal, but then you got Baal Amen. You got Zeus, but then you got Zeus Amen. So they incorporate with Amen for a reason, and you can unpack it as Amen from Egypt, which is different than Aden. You have the light, the sun, the solar, and then Amen is the darkness, the unknown, the unseen. That's why even King Tut was Tudok Aden before they changed his name to Tudok Amen.
Right.
Because
that's
they wanted to erase
with Akhenaten, right?
Yeah, and so politics are involved in these cults. This is all political stuff. This is, and you'll read about people they'll align with certain cults for political reasons. And now we're actually getting into politics because that's where we're at. Because next from here, we would go to Gethsemane. We're in Egypt and we're completing our circle. And there it is, Gethsemane, an olive grove. And it's exactly what it is, an olive grove. And the name is the oil press. And that's what it is. There's an oil press there. The book that we got a couple different articles and books that we use to unpack this. But one is David Edom. And he's a professor of olives at the Olive Museum in Israel. And his book is Olive Culture in Ancient Israel. And what he talks about is types of olive trees in Israel, ancient Israel. And he'll tell you that some trees are used for wood, firewood. Those trees are older trees, dying trees. Some trees are used for food, and those are commercial, and these are the commercial olive groves. And he tells you that Gethsemane is not a commercial olive grove. It's a ritual olive grove. It was used for ritualized purposes, anointing oil. See, for the rituals that they were doing in that area at the time, olive oil was central to the mysteries.
Right.
They put it on people, on the altars, on everything. And the oil acted as a kind of conduit or between the spirit.
Well, we know they were infusing cannabis into these oils and they were placing them on them and they were being absorbed into the bloodstream, right?
Yeah.
And they could have been doing other compounds as well, but for certain cannabis was being used in this way.
Oh yeah. And this was a sacred grove. Gethsemane was a sacred grove. It was for a ritualized purpose. And next to it or up the hill is a cemetery. We have all the elements of the sacred grove, the cemetery. It has a mikveh nearby, for the ritual immersion, like the water temples I was showing you. It's like a small version of the big one. And, the mikveh is used before sacrifices, before the Passover sacrifice is put in there, which was there. That's the weekend that we'll be discussing, that is Passover when this happens. It's used before sex and after sex, after menses, to ritually purify. So there's a lot of reasons for the mikveh to be used in sacrificial and sexual context that's nearby. And let's talk about Gehenna. Gehenna means the valley of Hinnom. And it's translated to some people, it means hell in the Bible. And that's half a mile away. You just walk out that little gate right there and you go around to the left, you get the Baal almond altars where they used to sacrifice the kids. And there's several books about in ancient Israel and the Passover sacrifice and kids and stuff. And
right.
We'll leave those authors below in the links. If you want to debate those authors, not us.
Right. But it's important that we understand that there's a culture here of this kind of violence, that this space is known for this. It's set aside for this. And this far predates any of the Christianity that we know.
They inherited this era. And so, like I said, you walk out the door right there and you go to the left or right half a mile is the Valley of Hell. It means the sons of Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom. And the reason it was called hell is because it's at a place outside the walls where the wind would blow it downwind, and they use it as the trash dump, and where they would dump all the dead bodies, and they would light these fires to burn it. So fires were constantly burning there, and it was associated with hell. That's where you would end up, would be in that smelly dead bodies and trash outside the city, in between the Garden of Gethsemane. And that place still has like I said, the foundation for the altars of Baal almond for the child sacrifice. And now the valley, at the top part of the valley, is turned into a posh, exclusive Israeli neighborhood with movie theaters and rich people. Like you can't go there. And the bottom part is unmanned because on each side is the Arabs and the other side is the Israelis, and they fight. And that's like a fighting buffer zone. And in between is the Baal almond sacrificial altar that's still there. There's a lot of stuff happening in this little area. And this we're talking about is not too far from Tyre or Egypt. This is walking distance. These mysteries that we're talking about. So this used to be a Baal almond area right here. 100%.
Right? It's also
100%.
important we understand, people have a misconception about people in the past and how connected they were. Right? These distances are not as far as you would think. These people will walk, they will travel, they are connected by boat, these distances mean nothing.
And guess what? They found a purple dye factory walking distance from here on the coast.
Wow.
And they thought it originally was a stronghold, a Canaanite stronghold for military stronghold. And they're like, nah, this was a processing plant for the Murex shells in Israel. As well as even in Tyre isn't the oldest processing plant for the shells. It's Ugarit. You go up to Ugarit, and that's where the oldest production of the shells are found. Because they had processing plants up and down the coast right there, not just Tyre. And and like I said, the shells make other colors. They have ones that make red, and these robes, like all the robes they're wearing in these different mythologies, these robes are psychoactive. The dyes in them are psychoactive, whether it's harmala, saffrons, no matter what, all the colors in ancient times had psychoactive properties. And the way that they release the properties is through, you have fats, solids, alkaloids, tannins, and you separate these through these cooking processes. And it's these dye houses that evolve into your fashion houses in your pharmaceutical industry in later times. So Versace and Sandoz, those come out of your dye manufacturers, which were coming out of the coast right here. These are the top dogs because they had access to everything.
Right.
Imagine Tyre is like your
people either, right? There are other psychoactive dyes as well. Like you were telling me about that red dye, and then you said there was another white. There's several you had mentioned. The yellow tannid dye, I think, as well.
And there's some in every country.
Mm-hmm.
You have the blue, which is the road.
The lapis lazuli dyes, and we know that they also were trading with the purple from people in Crete and whatnot, because there's that exchange that's happened.
Oh yeah, Crete and Mycenaean culture and Crete and all that's. See, here's the thing. You notice on our map, when you looked at that Phoenician map, and and we looked at all the purple around it, where the purple is, you see no purple in Greece.
Right. They never conquered Greece. They never went there.
Well, no, they went there, but
they went there, yeah.
They have a relationship with them.
Yeah, they never settled.
And so if we tell the story in one way, they're Canaanite. If we tell the other way, they're how do you say the word Pulaski?
Pulaskian.
Pulaskian.
It's weird because it has a G, but it's kind of pronounced like a C. Pulaskian.
So it's how they're connected to people, you know, meaning they set up all these territories everywhere else, but they didn't set up their territories in Greece. But in Greece, they're practicing the rituals, and they recorded them that are synonymous with them because the ingredients come from there, not from Greece.
Yeah, you're right. They're sister cultures, right? They're non-antagonistic to one another.
You know, and also, like, you got Athena in Athens, and how Athena brought the olive trees.
Right. And you mentioned too that that they were burning their dead, and they were putting the dead ashes into these urns. Athens is one of the few Greek cultures where they're cremating the dead.
Oh,
which is kind of an interesting connection.
So much to unpack. So much, folks. You know,
right?
I think next time in our next video we'll explore the Garden of Gethsemane, based on these rituals and elements. You know, and see if the characters in the Bible, if this maybe can put a little context in why they might have been doing that stuff. That it's not so wild after all. That there's already pre-existing rituals and traditions demographically in that area. It's right there. It's geographic, it's demographic, it's, you know.
No, this is the thing that we want to stress here, right? Like, we want to people to understand that, especially at this time, people are far more connected. These identities are far more loose. You can these cultures are intermingling, and they're connecting with one another. If one group is doing it, chances are the other group is doing it in some way, or the rebellion
30 miles away, the group that's 30 miles away that speaks the same language.
Right.
So I guess maybe one of the questions we're going to ask next time is, what was John the Beloved doing in a sacred grove in the wee hours of the morning before Passover?
Right. We want to know these things, like, why were these characters in the grove, right? What, you were talking about the sacred grove as a place of protection, right? Where you could avoid
asylum,
right?
Asylum. And if once you get in that grove, you're supposed to be protected from the authorities. You're free to do the non-leader disturbance that brings about the renewal through the communion of the dipsass and the purple and all the elements are there.
All the elements are there. And this is the thing, like, I think from my perspective, like, studying more of the Indian stuff, okay? When you look at these sacred groves, or you go to these sacred groves in India, it's the same like you guys that you were talking about. They're these set apart places that are protected, that cannot be touched. And when you do go into them, they're the main thing, they're set up for snakes. They purposely install snake nests. They'll grow. There's a type of lily that they purposely grow there called the snake lily, because it looks like a snake. And this is understood to be the place where you worship the goddess Bhu Devi, the Earth Mother, in her primal form. And she cries out for what? For blood.
Yeah. It's ironic.
30,000 of those in India today.
Well, no, I think 125,000 is what I read yesterday online. 125,000 protected sacred groves in India. They're attaching the god to the grove, and then that's a way to get around conservation, so they don't tear down the trees.
It's the only way
what's ironic?
The capitalists, right?
Yeah. You know where snakes like to hang out? In olive groves.
Right.
Oh, come on, my boy. My girl, my lady. I used the wrong pronoun there, folks. You saw me.
No worries. But so this is kind of like where we're coming from right now. So what we have been showing, or tried to show in this episode, is just this nature of the sacred grove as these places that are set apart for the natural world to exist, so that we can experience that raw violence, right? That raw freedom, because and that vulnerability and fear, because we have to understand the duality of this relationship. It's the only way that these sacred groves make sense, because when you go there, it's both for that bliss, for that transformation, for experiencing the divinity, but there's also that dark flip side, and they're synonymous, right? You can't separate these two experiences from one another, and they're not trying to. They're trying to embrace both, right? Like it's like it's a liminal, set apart reality where you can return and experience that oneness through destruction, through the spending of excess, through sex, through death, right? It has to be a waste. It has to be a taboo, you know?
I can't. I'm going to leave it at that. There's nothing I can't even say after that. You know, folks, I'll tell you guys, have a good one. Have a blessed Saturday. In 3 days, resurrect on the 21st on the equinox. You know, come back to life.
Love to all of you guys. We'll just we'll leave it. If does anyone have any questions or anything before we call it an episode? Just gonna look at the chat here. And yeah, you know, our next episode that we're going to come back on, do you want to just give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about?
Next time we'll get into the characters of Gethsemane. You know, now that we've set the stage on the grove there and what kind of rituals were taking place before these characters, we're going to see if that informs us as to maybe what they've been doing. And in the Sea of Galilee, we'll go into Mary Salome, the myrrh bearers, the women of means, and how that connects to Phoenician culture, Canaanite culture. Join us. And make sure you guys like and subscribe. We appreciate the comments. Share with your peoples. You know, we're having fun. You know, have fun with us, folks.
And the whole point, like we said, of this show is this is an exploration. Neither of us are experts, you know. None of us are real academics in that sense. Like I had brief experience, but we're just passionate people who want to tell you an interesting story that's rooted in historical analysis. And I hope we did that for you today. And if you guys have any cool stories, any cool myths and stuff that is related to the things that we're interested in here, please reach out and tell us, and maybe we'll do a deep dive in the future.
And expect we might have some special guests coming up in the future. You never know.
Right? So thank you guys again so much for tuning in. We've been Occult Explorers, and make sure you follow Drawing Down the Stars and you follow the Occult Barbershop. And we'll be back next Saturday. So take care, guys.
Ciao.